Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. This is Mike Steckline, partner with the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. Today's presentation is going to be from Rafael Rojas from Providence Health and Services I met him in Torrance, California. And background on this is he was participating in one of our courses, and he told me about his doctorate research, and some of it was on the topic of mindfulness in the lean journey, and that was a topic that interested me. So I asked him if he would present a webinar, and he agreed. So that's going to be the topic today. A few housekeeping details before we get into it. The phones are going to be on mute, but if you do have a question during the course of the presentation, just use the chat function and type out your question. We're going to unmute the phones toward the end and see if anybody does have any questions or immediate feedback for Rafael. This session is being recorded, and the link to the recording is going to go out to those that participated today as well as those that are on our distribution list. So with that, I'm going to quickly turn this over to Rafael, and he's going to walk us through some interesting materials, and I hope that you'll find this to be beneficial in your work. Rafael?
Okay, thank you, Mike. So to get started, just a quick background, or my background is in mechanical engineering, and then I have been in healthcare for about 11 years doing process improvement. Mainly have worked with a couple of health systems, Providence Health and St. Joseph Health in California. The research, I've been doing research for the last 3 years, and my main interest is in organizational behavior, industrial psychology, but more specifically on team learning and team development, which is how improvement happens. And I'm also interested in innovation and how teams quickly innovate. So kind of framing my my background and my interest in the research. So as my interest also is, of course, to share some of the learnings and theoretical learnings in science to apply to, in this case, our lean journey. So my hope is that as we get into the objectives, my hope is that, in the topics of mindfulness and neuroscience to help us as lean practitioners to hopefully click some insights and develop some knowledge that will help us do our job a little bit better. So we'll talk about mindfulness, neuroscience, but we also talk about collective mindfulness, which is in alignment with the topic of culture, safety, and high reliability organizations, which in healthcare is becoming more and more popular. So. Okay. So 5 different the sequence of the presentation. I'll talk a little bit about why this topic, why now. Then we'll get into an introduction to mindfulness. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but a good introduction to mindfulness, how that correlates to specifically with coaching and maybe also teaching of the principles and tools and systems. And then we'll jump into neuro leadership, which is the neuroscience and the social and work environment, and then collective mindfulness. So I want to start with something that happened actually a couple of weeks ago as I was putting these slides together, and in the news, if you saw this, it was President Obama actually in the University of Pittsburgh shaking a hand of a person who is paralyzed, and he shook the hand through this robotic arm, and so it went both ways. First, President Obama touched the hand, and this person actually was able to sense and feel that somebody was shaking his hand, and then he also replied, right? And he connected his brain in certain ways that the circuitry told the robot to actually shake back the president's hand. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's on the topic of mindfulness and neuroscience. There is a couple of views, and there's a dilemma there where science is trying to better understand, but it's important to see that there is a dilemma between the existence of the brain and the existence of the mind. So there's a very materialistic view where scientists think about the brain and the mind as one, but there's another view where we want to think about the brain and the mind as two different things. And the way I see it is that the mind being the software and the brain being the hardware. And it's important to highlight that because we do have technology now that can detect, for example, through sensors, what the color is or how far things are, and which is good, which provides information. But I think the role of the mind is to telling us not, knowing that we know that something is red or something is blue or something is green, but actually knowing that we know that that is red or blue. So there's a difference there, and it's important to highlight. So as you know, in the lean journey and then the uh, transformation model, we talk about seeing things and that connect with what we do and what we get. But seeing things, we often talk about mindsets. And um, as I started, in my process improvement journey and try to learn more, we talk about mindsets and how we see the world, and we get to choose how we see the world. So it's important that those thoughts and consciousness plus the brain kind of get together to get to that mindset. Also, at the time there was actually for the last 10, 15 years, the technology has developed so we can understand a little bit more of the brain and how that circuitry happens in different situations. So this is just an example of problem solving and for example emotional functions like fear. So I just caught my eye as well. So also, as we all know, as we practice and implement changes, we always are faced with the bad news that changing behaviors is hard. So hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So I was interested in understanding that a little bit more and how we can, from our perspective as coaches and teachers, how we can guide our learners in a better manner. And then the last bullet point there is the willful, I call it willful consciousness, but it's something that that also caught my eye as far as and as we practice learning different skills, there is these two differences and these two I guess approaches, and we have to find a balance in between the two. And experience being how often we do a repetitive task and just gain experience on doing that in a repetitive way, and versus deliberate thinking. So here we have performed a task a different number of times, but now we're asking ourselves, how do we challenge ourselves in thinking that performing that task in a different way, which is kind of the foundation of or leading into problem solving. So but we can't just have one or the other. There has to be a balance between the two. So just a couple of slides here on connection with the model. I will talk a lot about, of course, environment and relations, building relations, and then culture and climate that connect with consequences and behavior. So kind of grounding ourselves in the topic and how it relates to the model. Also, in the topic of culture change, Mike talks about in one of his white papers about this leading behavior change and defining, practicing, messaging. The behavior is not enough, but we actually as leaders have to build the systems around it. So it's in alignment with it as well. So still within this, I was trying to understand a little bit more of how people are motivated to do what we ask them to do in certain situations, or we're coaching them to do. So there is, of course, this notion of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and we know that extrinsic motivation goes so far. So we want to focus more on the intrinsic side. So this is just something that I have to offer as far as building a system. We know, and we repeatedly hear about the importance of feedback and the timeliness of feedback. Actually, we were in a leadership development workshop a couple of days ago here in my organization, and people still ask, well, how do we get to this culture change, and how do we, reinforce behaviors? And the answer of the speaker was, well, feedback is key to ensuring that that behavior change. So, um, oops, so some learnings from organizational behavior. We know that as we change behavior or propose to change the behavior, there has to be an antecedent in a behavior and then a consequence. And the consequence, I just call it, this is actually a science for about 10 years, has existed about 10 years, a picnic model, that consequence not necessarily in a negative um, connotation, but it can be positive as well. So this is just an example as possibly building a system on feedback, right? So if you look at this table, we have a current state and a future state and an antecedent side of it. We might have a lack of understanding, and this, you're probably familiar with some of these current states: lack of understanding of roles, limited resources, time pressure, and there's other priorities. In this case, for the leader, right? We're assessing the leader, and the behavior that we see is that the leader maybe works on other priorities or is crisis managing. And so the consequence on the consequence side kind of illustrate the picnic model. So PIC or PIC on the consequence being positive, immediate, or certain, and then NIC on the end side, negative, immediate, or certain. So we assess that consequence, and so the consequence of working on other priorities and crisis managing could be, the consequence could be increased staff turnover. But that's a negative consequence, and it's a future consequence, not necessarily immediate consequence, and it's uncertain. You may or may not have that turnover. Process inefficient because we're crisis managing, we may not truly solve problems. So so there's that. We could tally that as a negative consequence, and future, not necessarily a certain consequence or an immediate consequence, and it's uncertain. And we can go on and on. So the important of this is that we do want to have provide feedback. We want it to be positive, we want it to be immediate, and we want it to be certain. The example that I usually give is a freeway example. It's we have a 65-mile-an-hour speed limit, and when there's no highway patrol, the people will usually go 70, 75 miles an hour. When the highway patrol comes onto on the freeway, that behavior changes. And so I would consider that a negative, immediate, and possibly certain, right? Certainly getting a ticket for going too fast. So it is important to identify those characteristics of the consequence or the feedback in this case. So in the future state, as we understand this more and try to get to a behavior that we want to go. So education, for example, in the future state, we say we want to educate on goals, and we want to partner with an improvement coach. And this is the leader actually crafting this and understanding what behavior he or she wants to see. So as behavior, for example, I want to schedule my Gemba walks or be consistent with doing that and engage. And I do want to engage my improvement coach. So there's a behavior component there as well. So similarly, you can see the characterization of that feedback. But the importance, for example, of engaging a coach here, you can see it's an immediate feedback, which is positive, and it's immediate, and it's certain. So the value of understanding that is the formation of a habit. And so as we form that habit, you can see the solid line, the pick line, which is positive, immediate, and certain. As we learn and we provide feedback, each one of these, consecutive points, we are providing feedback through a coach. We are tending to form the strength of the habit, which is where we wanted to go. The example of the freeway, somebody going over the speed limit, may be an NIC reinforcement, negative, immediate, certain, and but it's not necessarily creating that strength and habit. So we may be, going by the standard, but not necessarily creating that intrinsic motivation to generate that high strength habit. And then, of course, if there's no reinforcement, the behavior is going to go to where it was before. Another area of interest, and this kind of grounds my my interest on continuous learning, really, is in team learning. Is how some business leaders or business management leaders understand the advantage of organizations being able to learn as quickly as they can. And so these are just, as we know, Toyota, for example, from the point of view of continuous learning, how quickly they've shown how quickly they can put out models and different models and ahead of other similar companies. So it is an advantage for a company to learn quickly so they can adjust. Intel is another example, and in that industry, electronic industry, of course, they have to quickly come up with new products, and Apple, of course, quickly innovation. So learning organizations are able to adapt and adopt. And so as we move forward, how can we, as we get into more of the mindfulness piece and the neuroscience piece, I want to keep in mind that these are things that we know as coaches. For example, on the left side, we have, as I coach, I know that I'm going to pose a challenge to the learner, but I want to make sure that I don't get into that red zone of anxiety and make sure that that my challenges are in line with the skills, and so that learner kind of follows that flow channel. And then, of course, raise the stress. These are things, I'm bringing this up because these are things that we've known and not necessarily have been discovered because of our better understanding of mindfulness or neuroscience. But I'm hoping to inform these knowledge in a better way with the knowledge that we have with mindfulness and neuroscience. And then on the right hand side, I have stress, and we talk about eustress, which is the gray zone where we actually want to take advantage of that positive energy and not necessarily get into the anxiety side. So as I mentioned, organizations that learn are able to adapt and be more agile. And organizations rely heavily on leadership development. However, some of the reasons why I was also interested is that in general, leadership development is poor. I know a study show that probably around, I think it's about 15% of leadership development efforts are considered effective, and about 85% are not effective. So there's a great amount of money that goes into leadership development. It's not effective. Also, we know that as we talked about leadership behavior change, we don't only have to define those behaviors and model those behaviors, but we have to build those structures to allow for those behaviors to happen. And then talking about leadership type, we want to align with these types of leadership: humble, empowering leadership, or servant leadership, in the way that we see these desired effects. like for example, we want to have better relationships and communication. We want to build that space for coaching and develop not only others as we coach, but also ourselves. Develop that intrinsic motivation that creates that energy to form that strength of habit. So let me pause here. So far, my intent was to kind of provide you a sense of where I was when I started doing my research, my understanding of course, along with my understanding of process improvement, but also organizational behavior. So I know that organizations learn, and the more they learn, the better they are in adapting and being more agile. Um, we also know that leaders are the ones who need to create those structures to help us drive those behaviors. And then also, the last thing I would add is that we've got to be mindful of, uh, or that our mindset is really comprised of our mind and our brain. So, an introduction to mindfulness. There is two views, and I've simplified this, but I think it's a good way to introduce the topic. So there's an Eastern view and a Western view. So mindfulness, as you can see here, there's a couple of definition, but the common the common uh, theme in mindfulness is that it provides attention, increases attention, awareness, and provides a moment for us to be non-judgmental. On the Western side, um, Langer is probably the scientist who's started talking about on the Western culture about mindfulness, and she talks about drawing distinctions from what we see and not hanging ourselves into things that we assume are going to be or could be, but maybe looking at other other ways to see the current experience. So on the Eastern view, another just to highlight difference on the views, I think it's important to highlight it because it will help us understand a little bit more of mindfulness. And I think both of them are valuable in the line of work in our line of work. So in the Eastern view, the Eastern view sees mindfulness from the point of view of suffering. So uh, we suffered through being attached to something or having aversion to something, and we of course experience emotion through that experience. So in the Eastern view, meditation is a way to achieve that level of mindfulness by cultivating stillness. Um, on the Western side, however, the intent is not necessarily to cultivate mindfulness through stillness, but cultivate mindfulness to acting. And it talks about um, Langer, who is the one of the first scientists that talked about this, talks about mindlessness and how for example, I was driving to work this morning and on the freeway again, and I missed my exit, and so that was an act of mindlessness, right? I was driving and I completely missed my exit, so I was not paying attention. Um, for different reasons, but it's an act of mindlessness. So uh, the mindlessness really is affected by our experience, the environment, what we're currently seeing, or previous experiences as well. So the solution in this side is Langer talks about distinction making, how we can um, um, reduce that mindlessness. So on the Eastern view, we have meditation. It's an example of mindfulness-based stress meditation, a reduction meditation that helps us reduce stress. And on the Western side, Langer talks about using activity to help us be more mindful. So art, music, um, um, maybe playing sports as well. So mindfulness can be achieved, I think, in my view, can be achieved through activity on the right side, but also stillness. Um, and there's different techniques to achieve that stillness, and yoga is one of them. And there's different types of meditation approaches to achieve that level of mindfulness. One of the questions that I get asked is there's what is it, mindfulness or emotional intelligence? They're different, and I think they are similar. I think emotional intelligence is broader than mindfulness. For those who have a deep understanding of emotional intelligence, we know that it doesn't only involve control of emotions, but also managing that social relationship. And so mindfulness, in my mind, I think it provides that acknowledging of emotions, and like in the second bullet point, it says we comprehend our emotions, but not only our emotions. I think we also comprehend other people's emotions. So, and we're able to govern those emotions, and I think that kind of builds is a good foundation to build that all the elements that kind of fall into emotional intelligence. So, benefits of mindfulness on the clinical side, I just wanted to separate them. There's, of course, and some of you may be familiar, but there's benefits on reducing substance abuse, eating disorders, anxiety, and suicide. On the non-clinical side, some of those same benefits as far as reducing anxiety and empathy levels are important to reduce, for example, stress, listening activities, and improving interpersonal communication and transparency. Increase quality and quantity of attention, and we're going to talk about how attention is important, and as we think through different scenarios and help us use that cognitive ability that we have in our brain. So let me step back here a little bit and kind of reflect on what I talked so far on mindfulness. And I think in the last slide I talked about attention and, well, on the definition we talked about attention and awareness, but the importance of having that level of attention and awareness will help us be more mindful then, and not being so mindless. Also, mindfulness helps us increase the likelihood of us accepting reality as it is and not necessarily making assumptions. So it helps us with framing that mindset to what's actually happening, not what we would like it to be. Show of empathy as we build relationships, and maybe intent to understand as we build those relationships and understand the workplace. I think there's a good news in meditation and developing mindfulness. Different techniques, of course, that call for taking time to do this. But there is research that shows that mindfulness can be cultivated in short periods of time, so it can be done it doesn't take that many resources to actually develop your mindfulness. So another piece that is key to reflect on is that mindful leaders. In my research, I've shown that mindful leaders promote an environment of safety, which is really key. So an environment of safety where employees feel that they can speak up and they can voice their concerns. So it's important, as we know, to talk about problems or opportunities and kind of get engaged in problem solving. And then the emotion piece is, one of the benefits of mindfulness to govern our stress, for example, and control our emotions. I think it's important as we coach, and will help us as coaches to not make assumptions. All right, so let's get into the neuroleadership. And here I just want to give an introduction to very high level neuroscience and how that relates to leadership, and then eventually to problem solving. But these are very high-level brain areas that are important, and that's why I'm mentioning them. So the prefrontal cortex is a very important area where we do our problem solving. So you can see there's a cognitive processing going on in that area. The motor cortex, where our motion kind of happens after there's processing. The limbic system is very important as well, as we attach those processes that we receive the stimuli, whether it's through vision or touch, and we react or attach emotion to that. So I think as we move forward in understanding, so just giving these, sorry for switching the slides, but just keeping these high-level areas of the brain, we can start understanding different situations. For example, in this case, stress or stress at work. And so what happens as we understand more of what's connected in the brain, as we get into stress, our blood pressure increases. There is there's signals that come from our nerves, and there are hormonal signals as well. So adrenaline and cortisol are emanated. So, and as we do that, there is the key part of stress is that you can see this PFC or prefrontal cortex is um, not used, and it's a problem because, as we know now, prefrontal cortex we use to problem solve or do our cognitive processing. So in stress, the amygdala that you see there is reducing our ability to process information, and we send those signals down to what you can see the reflective and habitual responding of the circuit. So we're more using more of the primitive brain, and we're just reacting to things, and which is not good, right? So emotions are, in a more primitive way, are reactive and not necessarily processed in a cognitive way. So the reason I brought this up, of course, the stress is one of the highest topics talked at work, and you can see the areas of the brain that are used and not used. And just like stress, there's um, other situations or social situations where we find ourselves in, and the brain connects the different parts of the brain in different ways, and so there is a circuitry there that that we need to understand. So it's the brain is a system of interconnected circuitries, and the question then with stress is how can we reduce and um, regulate ourselves so we use more of our prefrontal cortex or problem solving or cognitive ability during these times of stress? And the answer is yes. We have a power of will. Yes, we can. And studies have shown that there is about a 1/20th of a second in between the amygdala actually sending the reactive signals and us moving. So there is time where scientifically showing that there is time and to prevent from us reacting and controlling our emotions. So there is science behind it, and yes, we have power of will. So the circuitry, like I said, is we have a better understanding on different situations. In this case, it's just an example of those brain that is practice mindfulness, for example, and the blue areas show the areas of the brain that a mindful brain use. So you can see the prefrontal cortex. We've talked about the cognitive capability of the prefrontal cortex. So it's important. So we can show that a mindful brain has that ability. The insula and the posterior cingulate cortex that you see there, those are important because those areas kind of help us change our perspective and maybe see things differently, which I think is important. The striatum, it's an area in mindfulness it's been demonstrated that area is also developed, but it's an area that help us control our or helps us see the rewards in others. So in other words, it's starting to see one person is rewarded more than others, and then we start to possibly judge. And so the development of this part of the brain helps us be more judgmental in a way, or less judgmental. So these networks that are built as we, in this case, practice, for example, mindfulness, are brain maps, and that we can actually develop. This is just an example of, on the same topic of stress, a comparison between the red bar is a group of meditation practitioners, and on the left-hand side, the red bar is shorter than the yellow, meaning that the cortisol level on the left is lower, which is a cortisol hormone that prevents us from actually using our prefrontal cortex and deactivating that amygdala. So it's shown, this study showed that mindfulness practitioners actually are able to control those emotions and be less stressed. On the right-hand side, it's just a similar chart. In this case, it's a different antibody measured, and the higher the antibody, the easier it is for us to control our emotions. So, and the good news, like I said, is in this case, for example, the reason I picked this case is because the control group, what they did is they practiced 5 days for 5 days, 20 minutes mind-body meditation, which is, in the simplest way, is focusing on, for example, on your breathing and doing that at the end of the day for 20 minutes, and they saw these results. So it is, the good news is that it is demonstrated that this can happen with small practice. So as we talk about these brain maps, we need to understand how these brain maps occur. So there's the wiring, right? We talk about hardwiring, and the hardwiring really occurs through synapses. And at a closer look, we think or picture our neurons, how they connect. There is a chemical connection where neurotransmitters are released, and between those two neurons, and there is a connection. There's that synapse, and that's the hardwiring that happens on the brain. So very basic description, but in a nutshell, that's really what happens in our brain and how our neurons are connected to each other. So as we understand a little bit more of these synapses, it's interesting to learn also that our brain is continuously changing. Sometimes, or scientists in the past have thought that our brain is fully developed when we are 3 years old, and there's a small development until maybe 8 years old. But now science is shown that our brain continues to develop even in our 20s. And in our adulthood, we have shown, scientists have shown that we have the ability of keeping growing new neurons that will provide new connections or new synapses. So the brain is an ongoing construction site, and our environment, our reflections, and our experiences really shape our brain and the way that we perceive things. So as we hardwire, the question is is it possible for us to make new connections or erase those connections? So this example, and we start talking a little bit about neuroplasticity, which is our ability as humans to build new wiring. So in this case, example A, we have this habit and this particular behavior, this map, this connection that we've practiced for a long time, and we're trying to change it to this yellow wiring of connection, which is a different behavior. And so what neuroplasticity tells us is that the more we do the yellow, the white wiring will get weaker and weaker. So the takeaway from this is that it is practically, we know it's practically impossible to deconstruct that initial wiring, that white wiring, but we do know that it's easier to build a new pathway as opposed to erasing an old pathway. So if you think about the Grand Canyon, it took years and years to get to where the Grand Canyon is now. So it's going to be hard to erase that wiring, and it would be easier to start possibly want to create a different route. It is easier to maybe flow water in a different direction and start creating a new path. So it is easier to create a new path as opposed to erase an old path. So as we create this new wiring, a couple of insights in neuroscience tell us about the power of the synapse. So one of the outcomes of the synapse, of course, is the wiring, but the other outcome is the release of a lot of energy. So we need to take advantage of this energy. So one example of this wiring occurring in our brain is when we, as we coach or as we problem solve, we say, okay, we need to make a decision or we need an idea. And so there's that aha moment, and all of us have experienced that aha moment, and we see it in our, in the phase of who is learning, and you see it, somebody kind of looking away, or maybe even voicing, right? Oh, I know what to do. So there's that aha moment, and the aha moment is really important because new hardwiring is happening in the brain. A lot of energy is released. The bad news is that energy is happens in a short period of time. So as a coach, the takeaway is, as we learn of these, or as we see these insights on those who we teach or we coach, we need to take advantage of that energy to translate it into action. So with hardwiring or wiring new maps in our brain, science talks about and shows that attention is important. So I think here's where mindfulness comes into play. The more attention and awareness we bring to that prefrontal cortex, the better we will be with wiring or creating new wiring in the brain. It is important then to understand that, as coaches, that new habits take time, but they don't take that much time. I think the takeaway is that that coaching is important, feedback is important, but it has to be as often as possible. And so one of the things that I do as coach, on positive feedback and talking about next steps as I coach, is to not necessarily approach it as in a negative way, but also but approach it in a positive way. So instead of asking, why didn't we meet the goals, or why aren't we not a target, maybe ask ask the same question, maybe in a different way, in a positive way, as far as maybe asking, what can we do next, or do we have an understanding of what we need to do next time to prevent this from happening? So it's kind of asking the same question, but in a different, more positive way. Another key takeaway from neuroscience is bias, and we know all of us do this, right? So we talk to somebody, as we talk to somebody, there is connections that happen in our brain, and those connections are most likely happening from our previous experience. And the problem with that is that we're not really seeing or listening to what the other person is saying, so we make interpretations. And so we need to be aware of, as coaches, that this is happening. We need to see our world as it really is. And we know, as I mentioned before, that we have the power of will to decide to do that. So connecting what I've talked about so far with, this is just an example of a coaching model. So we are familiar with a kata model, and some of the steps that kind of talks about following. Mike Rother talks about these steps, and as we coach, um, from the learnings of neuroscience, in coaching in general, the sequence that I put down below is my suggestion as to how to follow the coaching piece. So we need to build trust not only to communicate with others information, but to build that intent and relationship that as a coach have the best intent to develop that other person who I'm talking to. We also know that in the attention piece, we also know that our brain has a 20-minute or less span of attention. And I think that's important because it kind of guides us to have coaching sessions. I would have coaching sessions that are 20 minutes or less. And maybe even when we teach different material, our delivery of material should be 20 minutes or less. And my intent in this presentation of showing that orange slide is to kind of pause and not go more than 20 minutes at a time so we can reflect on what we've learned. Connections, that's important. We talked about synapses and hardwiring. There's a lot of energy that is released. But a lot of times the leader does that thinking, and we in a way we waste that energy that could be coming from our employees. So connection is related to having the employees or the learner actually do the thinking. Energy, of course, as we make the connections, there's we talked about energy being released. So there's that energy, and we as coaches need to be mindful of that happening and taking advantage of that energy, and not only in creating the next steps, but also I think kind of connecting that energy with challenging the learner, and then also, of course, keeping in mind the skill level of the learner. And then there's some space before we get to the review, but space in a way of maybe in the coaching session, there's a lot of information that is discussed, and the value of space in the neuroscience is about allowing us to possibly prune some of those experiences or ideas that were not necessarily valuable, but reflect on what is valuable before we take that next step. And then, of course, the review on next steps and providing feedback. So this is, from our learnings from neuroscience, this is what I would propose as a learning cycle, possibly, from building trust, attention, connection, energy, space, and review. So just a quick reflection on neuroscience, neuroleadership, I guess that's what I called it. The learner has to do the thinking. There's a lot of energy that is released as we wire and hardwire our insights and experiences. So we need to take advantage of that energy, and so the learner has to do the thinking. Also, the information is just information, as we know that we need to transform that into knowledge and insight, but it only occurs with reflection. So as we learn or as we coach, we have to pause for reflection, and reflection is very important. I think another teaching is that no two brains are the same because of the nature of hardwiring our brain based on our experiences and millions and millions of neurons that we have. There's different paths, and therefore there's no two brains that are the same. So I think there's a powerful teaching for us as coaches that to not make assumptions that what we're thinking the other person is also thinking. Also, the power of choice. We have the ability to choose what to do and what not to do. So, and we know that through science that is possible. And also, the brain is always in construction. Regardless of our age, we have the ability to use our prefrontal cortex to create new wiring. So, all those theories of our brain not being able to develop after certain ages has been debunked. So. That is not the case anymore. So we know that our brain can develop. So the last topic on collective mindfulness, we want to, um, as we talk about mindfulness individually, the the topic of collective mindfulness really had come more visible as healthcare organizations have brought the topic of safety or culture of safety, which is part of collective mindfulness. I think collective mindfulness goes beyond that. As yes, we are organizations that have high potential of disaster or occurring or making an error for that reaches our patient, but a collective mindfulness or a mindful organization is one that is continuously looking to detect errors and making sure that those didn't or don't happen. So regardless of where your organization has gone through, crew resource management, team steps, HRO, culture of safety, these are the basic elements of uh, collective mindfulness. And you can see, I'm not going to go through the detail in each one of these, but what I can say is that um, a mindful organization is one that continuously look for uh, uh, situations where error could happen. So not necessarily error has happened, but error could happen. And so similarly for us in our situation in Providence Health, we're presented as a becoming a mindful organization, but kind of creating this culture of safety. But it's very similar as we create a culture of continuous improvement. We need to design the structures that support these behaviors. So um, one of the key elements on collective mindfulness is our ability or the organization's ability or the team ability to identify what's expected and unexpected. And it's important because when something unexpected happens, it's a surprise, right? And when when we're faced with surprises, we don't like that because emotions come into play. And then most of the time we get into this tunnel vision, which is not good because we don't see the periphery and what's happening around us. So um, when surprises happen or risk or high risk or harm happens, organizations that are not as mindful may react in a tunnel vision or take decisions in a tunnel vision way. So mindful organizations are better equipped to deal with surprises. Um, and I think also the variability of our industry, things can happen and things change, and there's no one day that is the same. So um, the mindful organization is able to learn as well and learn quickly. And my research, the reason I bring the topic of collective mindfulness and mindful organization is because my research is showing that an organization that problem solves and adheres to this idea of collective mindfulness can improve in a faster way. So you can improve more rapidly if your teams are more mindful than others that are not. So it's a key takeaway. So just in a graphical way showing the concept of collective mindfulness, I talked about what expected versus unexpected. So foundation of identify what we want to see versus what it's unexpectedly happening, and kind of the surprises, evaluating those surprises, detect those problems, solve, and assess the practice. So the higher that collective mindfulness, the quicker we're going to be able to improve the process our problem solving. And this is off a little bit, but the intent of this was to show that there is overlap, right, on our lean processes, our lean principles and foundational behaviors with collective mindfulness. I think one of the pieces where the two differ or collective mindfulness in a way expands the understanding of problem solving is in the attention to detail as far as identifying potential errors. And in my mind, both of these kind of fall under the umbrella of continuous improvement. So uh, sort of the theme initially when I talked about learning organizations, um, in how the ability of these organizations to be more able to adapt and adopt. And it's not only about the mental ability, it's about our ability to relate to others. It's about our ability to change our behaviors, of course, in alignment with results. And one of the things that was pretty powerful from that I heard from one of the executives was that very successful executive, he talked about when he or she, when he in this case got out of bed, he always thought about the first thing in the morning he thought about is how can I myself get better? How do I self-develop myself? And it kind of brings together that self-awareness and attention, and then kind of go from there. So a quick reflection before I close. Continuous learning is important. I've been trying to make the case that continuous learning is important, but it's important because the leader in this environment creates the learning, and that mindful organizations are improved faster. In coaching, I showed that model on coaching where we start with a trust, and then of course we end with the next steps. But there's a possibility of exploring insights, reflecting, and possibility of exploring the thinking of others and taking advantage of that energy. And then I think the one area that I didn't mention, but I think it should be mentioned here, is the employee engagement, right? I talked about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and as we guide the coaching in that fashion, we create that intrinsic motivation, which at the end will increase our employee engagement. That's all I had. I'm gonna skip these. Mike?
Thanks, Rafael. That was great. I've unmuted the phones if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, and we could take some time to take that. And then I've got a few closing slides here to make sure that we've got this wrapping up close to time. I've moved over to the slide with resources, and that'll be something that will be on the recording. And Rafael and I also talked about his willingness to share the slides, and we're going to make those available for people that want to have access to them. So I appreciate that very much. Okay, it doesn't sound like there's immediate questions, but I'll bet that if people ponder over this a bit, there will be some follow-up questions. And if that's the case, you can forward those to me, and I'll connect Rafael with this, and we'll see what else we can continue to learn. I think this is fascinating and largely undiscussed topics that we need to learn more about. And that's one of the things that intrigued me. So I really appreciate Rafael taking the time to put this presentation together and to deliver it today. I thought this was great. So here's what's going to happen next. The recording to this webinar is going to go to our website. It's going to be moved over to the webinar recordings, and people will be able to access it there, as you can see on this screen. Some presentations that are coming up in December. Our friends from Winneshiek Medical Center in Decorah, Iowa, in the rehab department are going to talk a little bit about some of the great work that they're doing, and that's going to be on December 16th. January 12th, a little further up the road in La Crosse, Wisconsin, the folks from the Mayo Franciscan campus of the Mayo Clinic have been doing some terrific work on the application of what we call our IEX system standard, and how do you adjust and redesign systems. And they're going to be sharing some of the great examples and their lessons learned there. On January 20th, part 2 of a presentation that Dirk Van Rossum is putting together, again on this idea of systems and thinking about how do you adjust systems. A lot of what Rafael talked about as far as bringing leaders along also is something that Dirk's been working with, and he's going to be featuring a little bit more about. In February, Ajay Raikar is going to be talking some more about strategy execution and strategy deployment. We're currently in the process of writing a white paper, tentatively called the Pracademic's Guide to Strategy Deployment. And this is one of the topics along those lines, to continue to build that white paper and the knowledge around that. March the 10th, going back to Winneshiek Medical Center, Lisa Radke, who's the Chief Administrative Officer, is going to talk a little bit about not only what's going on in the rehab department, but as a larger system, what they're doing to apply these principles to design daily management, but also connected to strategy deployment systems there. They were awarded the top 20 critical access hospitals in the country. They've made a couple presentations, going to be making more presentations, and they've agreed to share their learnings with us on that date. Debbie McAllister is going to be talk a little bit about the power of vulnerability in coaching, and I think probably some of the things I heard from Rafael today, she's probably going to be building on some of those thoughts. A lot of it is around coaching, which is what Rafael talked about. If you have a presentation you'd like to share or an idea of something that's a challenge for you and you'd like to talk about it or have someone talk about it, please bring it to my attention. I'll make sure that we get something put together. If you'd like to join our group on LinkedIn, you can do so by contacting me. And then finally, just to thank everyone who's a veteran. My wife and I are veterans, and today's Veterans Day. So if you have some time, take some time to go thank a veteran for their service to the country. Hope everyone has a good day. And again, the recording link to this session is going to be available to others that either couldn't listen today or if you'd like to access it in the future. So thanks again for your time. And Rafael, thanks again for taking the time to make this presentation.